In our study of the Kena Upanishad, we are approaching the conclusion that the Upanishad is leading us to. And Sri Aurobindo, in his characteristic manner, points to some of the significant hints that will lead us to a deeper understanding of this conclusion. We have seen across the last few discussions how the Upanishad builds a big picture of the whole unfolding of evolution through the many levels of consciousness, through the working of the gods in each of these levels, until it brings us to that final culmination of the whole evolutionary journey. And that is in the realization of that as tad vanam, that delight. The text of the Kena taught us the means of introspection by which step by step we may accelerate this evolutionary process. And only when we have crossed beyond mind, when we have awakened to an intuitive knowledge, when our consciousness has opened to the perception of the infinite knowledge and the infinite consciousness, it is at that point that the Kena brings us to this last step, when it says, the name of that is that delight. As that delight, one should follow after it. He who so knows that, towards him verily all existences yearn. And so the Kena has not yet brought us to the final realization. It is showing us the last step to the final realization. Through each step that it has taken us, it has brought us to a greater knowledge and a greater consciousness, a wider and deeper experience. And this is the final step of its teaching, where it says the name of that is that delight. And you will recall our discussion last time on the deeper sense of the name. The name represents the truth of that here on a lower grade of consciousness. By calling upon the name, by dwelling upon the name, by our consciousness turning to this symbol, the name becomes a gateway to the realization of that which is beyond a name, that delight. And so it is thus that the Kena points to this last step of the journey, and it says, as that delight, one should follow after it. Meaning, all the steps that we have so far been to were all steps of forms or representations of Brahman. But this last step is the highest representation of Brahman, leads us to the Brahman in its highest station. He who so knows that, meaning you can know that in many ways, on many levels, but he who knows that as that delight, towards him verily all existences yearn. That is, the whole of the cosmos finds in him the radiation of the highest consciousness of Brahman as that delight. Now, in his commentary, Sri Aurobindo not only has elaborated on this, but he has pointed to another discussion when he makes reference to the all blissful Ananda of which the Taittiriya Upanishad speaks as the highest Brahman, from which all existences are born, by which all existences live and increase, and into which all existences arrive in their passing out of death and birth. Pass out of death, you don't go to that. When you pass out of both death and birth, that is, you are now master of the whole cycle of birth and death, then into that you grow. And this reference to the Taittiriya is what we now have to dwell upon, in order to fully appreciate this reference. And it is as this transcendent delight that the Brahman must be worshipped and sought. So what is this transcendent delight which the Taittiriya speaks of? And we look at Sri Aurobindo's own translation of the Taittiriya. There is no commentary that he has made other than the translation itself. And the translation also uses a language which is still early. It does not use Sri Aurobindo's later developed language and vocabulary, where he would make reference to the supermind and so on. He translates Vijnanam as knowledge only, matter as annam, as food, which are the more literal translations of these terms. Looking at the Taittiriya Upanishad, we find it is divided into 3 sections. And these are named, each section is named as a creeper, Valli. And there are 3 different creepers. The first is instructional creeper, Shiksha Valli. The second one is Brahmanada Valli or Anandam Valli, which is the creeper of the delight of Brahman. And the third one is Bhrigu Valli, which is the teaching or the revelation that Bhrigu receives in his own pursuit of the Brahman. The names of the Vallis are significant. The Valli themselves, the act of calling it a Valli, a creeper, is significant because the Upanishad leads as a creeper grows. There is a root, there is a deep-seated essential idea, out of which not a full branching out of its multifacets, but one stream of development, as in a creeper. And as the stream develops, it bursts out leaves. And each of the verses is one of those leaves, until the creeper rises in a gentle spiral, so to say, to its highest that it can go. Unlike a tree which would rise with a strong column, a foundation of an entire teaching perhaps, and then burst out into multifaceted revelations. So the sense of the Taittiriya is in this one line of thought developed. In the very first Shiksha Valli, it says it will expound the teaching, and it goes through many aspects of the teaching. It teaches you about the worlds, it teaches you about the shining fires, it teaches you about the higher knowledge, the Vijnanam, and then about the progeny, and then the teaching of the self. And these are the great Sanhitas, it says. And of each of these, there is something quite fascinating. I will briefly read, we will not have time to dwell on them because this may take an entire study in itself. But in briefly reading these, you will see how in a few brief images, in a few settings of relations, it captures knowledge in a multidimensional manner. So of the worlds, it says, earth is the first form, the heavens are the second form, that is the mental worlds. Ether is the linking, air is the joint of the linking, Vayu. Akasha is the linking and Vayu is the joint of the linking. And that's all it has to say about the worlds. Very simple. We could of course go deep into the whole symbol, but you will see the same symbol represented now on many levels. Next, concerning the shining fires. Fire is the first form, that is Agni. Surya, sun, is the latter form. The waters are the linking. Air is the joint of the linking, Vayu. Thus far concerning the worlds. I see in brief an exact same image, but with different contents of the image. And then the next concerning knowledge, the higher knowledge. The master is the first form, the disciple is the latter form. Knowledge is the linking, exposition is the joint of the linking. Very interesting. And you see here the relation between these, the link and then the joint of the link, which makes the link active. And then next, concerning progeny. Now again, progeny is the creative process. It is not just about biology, it is the whole consciousness process by which the manifestation takes place. The mother is the first form, the father is the latter form. Progeny is the linking, act of procreation is the joint of the linking. And finally, when it speaks of self, it says, the upper jaw is the first form, the lower jaw is the latter form, speech is the linking, the tongue is the joint of the linking. Thus far concerning the self. Now imagine if you had read this without the deeper sense of what these words actually mean. Following the literal sense, you might actually come to the conclusion that this is somebody who is confused, or at least we do not know anymore what those words mean. But when you see the cohesiveness across these various images, the fact that it goes through 5 stages in describing, and in each of the 5 stages it speaks of 2 different forms, a bridge between, and then the joint which makes active the bridge. You are led to the conclusion that there is some deep symbolism, some deep significance. And already when we deal with the aspect of knowledge, something within us recognizes, there's a hint, there's a suggestion made to the intuition. But the 5, now you will see why the 5 are important as we go further. And so on it continues. We skip most of the first Valli. In fact, the rest of the Valli is an elaboration of these 5 images, these 5 symbols, with such detail that you do not see the obvious connection. But each of those is an elaboration. And we come to the second Valli, the second creeper. And this is the creeper of Ananda of Brahman. And here, there is again we skip much of it. There is a series of steps or 5 stages in which it describes the nature of matter first. It's mapping out creation, but first with the nature of matter. And matter here is described in the same vocabulary as food, annam, which is both matter and food. And it discusses how all the creatures live in matter and as food. And it speaks of matter or food as the eldest of created things. And it is the green stuff of the universe. And those who worship the eternal as matter attain to the mastery of matter to the utmost. From matter all creatures are born, and being born they increase by matter. Lo, it is eaten and it eateth. And so it's described the nature of matter. Matter is being eaten even as it eats, and that's why it's called food in the symbolic vocabulary. But then having described this, it says, but there is a second, an inner self, which is other than this, that is the substance of matter. And that inner self is prana. The self of prana fills the self of food. And then the next chapter, the next verse, it speaks of the domain of prana, how it sustains things, describes the workings of life force. And then it says, but there is a second and inner self which is other than that which is prana. And that is made of mind. The self of mind fills the self of prana. So we have now looked at 3 levels already. And then it describes the nature of mind. And then it says there is another self. And the self of Vijnanam. Sri Aurobindo translates as knowledge or supermind. The self of knowledge fills the self of mind. And this knowledge self is made in the image of a man. And it describes the left side and the right side. And yoga is his spirit, which is the self of man. And mahas, which is the infinity of the supermind, is the lower member where he rests abidingly. And finally, the fifth, he says, having described the domain of this higher knowledge, it says, now there is yet a second and inner self which is other than this, which is of knowledge, and it is fashioned out of bliss. And the self of bliss fills the self of knowledge. Now the bliss self is made in the image of man. According as is the human image of the other, so is it made in the image of the man. Now I'm reading in more detail here because this is our focus. Love is the head of him. Joy is his right side. Pleasure is his left side. Bliss is his spirit, which is the self of him. The eternal is his tail or lower extension, wherein he rests abidingly. Whereof this is the scripture, that this is the scripture of this knowledge of bliss. And then we skip a couple of verses where he describes, the Rishi describes the nature of the universe and how it emerges. And now we come to the last verse of this second Valli. And it says, the bliss of the eternal from which words turn back without attaining, and mind also returns baffled. Who knows the bliss of the eternal? He fears not for anything in this world or anywhere. Verily to him comes not remorse nor torment. For he knows the eternal, knows these that they are alike, and delivered from them his spirit. And this, he says, this is Upanishad, the secret of the Veda. And thus the second Valli ends. And we go now to the third, Bhrigu Valli, where Bhrigu's son, Bhrigu as Varuna's son, comes to his father Varuna. Now recall, Varuna is also the lord of vastnesses, of infinities. And to him, Bhrigu comes and says, teach me of the eternal. So Varuna, who is the lord of infinity, eternity, is the most suited to teach this knowledge. And what does he say? And his father declared it to him thus: matter, life force, annam and prana, and eye and ear and mind, even these, seek thou to know that from which these creatures are born, whereby being born they live, and to which they go hence and enter again. For that is the eternal. Now you see here, the starting point that he gives is to dwell on that which is the origin of these things, which sustains these things, and into which these things return. But what are these things? Matter, life force, eyes, ears, and mind. Now you see the close relation with the text of the Kena. The first verse of the Kena started by asking, what is it that makes the mind go to its mark? What is it that is leading the life force in its journey? What is it that in the eye is seeing, or in the mind, or in the ear is hearing? The only difference is in the speech. While the Kena speaks of the speech which initiates our speech, this only speaks of matter. A slight difference, but for the other three being same, you see the close correlation. It starts similarly as the Kena does with our human experience. What do you know of yourself? Matter. Your own body and the domain of the material world. And of course your body is living, so life energy in your body and in the material world. These are things you can see, you can touch, feel and experience because you're one with it, you're living it. And your senses, your eyes and ears, hearing, and your mind. These 5 together form the human experience. There is nothing else in the lower human, animal human experience at least. And the question is asked, seek to know that from which these things are born. Where did your mind come from? Where did your sensory experience come from? Where did your life energy and even the physical experience of the world come from? And by which being born they live. What is it that sustains all this? And to which they go hence and enter again. It's as if you've got out of something to experience this and now you re-enter that. For that is the eternal. And Bhrigu concentrated himself in thought. And by the ascesis of his brooding, Sri Aurobindo translates also ascesis, he translates as concentration in thought, tapas. And by this brooding, we come now to the next verse. He knew matter for the eternal, annam, food. For from food alone it appears, and these creatures born and being born, they live by food, and into food they depart and enter again. Now when you read this text, on 2 levels, literally as food, our bodies are sustained by the food we eat. Our mind is nourished by the food we eat. If you eat poisonous food, well, your mind will become unstable, isn't it? Your life will break down, your senses will close. And you're sustained by the food, you're born of food, you're sustained by food, and when the life ends, your body becomes food for other things, isn't it? Literally on that level, except that the food word here also represents matter. So on a more profound level, it is matter. All things are drawn from an underlying universal material, sustained by this continuous inflow and outflow of the universal material, and all merges back into the universality of the material. Everything is being continuously recycled in nature's flow. And having come to this conclusion, Bhrigu comes back to his father. When he had known this, he came again to Varuna, his father, and said, interesting, he doesn't have found. He says, Lord, teach me the eternal. You see, in the very seeking what he has found, he knows this is not complete. Teach me the eternal. And his father said to him, by ascesis, by tapas, do thou seek to know the eternal, for ascesis is the eternal. And he concentrated himself in thought, and by the energy of his brooding, we go to the next step. He knew prana for the eternal, life energy, from which matter emerges. For from prana alone, it appears, are these creatures born, and being born, they live by prana, and to prana they go hence and return. And again he goes back to his father and says, teach me of the eternal. And again his father sends him to do further tapas. And he concentrated himself in thought. And by the intensity of his tapas, he comes to the next step, the third step. He knew mano brahmeti, he knew mind for the eternal. For from mind alone it appears. And again, exactly the same vocabulary. He goes back to his father, Lord, teach me the eternal. And he sends him back for this concentration. And through the energy of his tapas, he comes to the next realization. Vijnanam brahmeti. He knew knowledge or supermind for the eternal. For from knowledge it appears, and so on. Again he says, teach me the eternal. Again he is sent back to concentrate. And in the 5th effort, or the 5th step of his journey, Anando brahmeti vyajanat. As Anandam, delight, bliss is Brahman, he came to know, and the vocabulary is suggestive, he came to know Vyajanat, in every time it is Vyajanat, he came to know in identity, not in rational thought, but in identity. So, the translation, he knew bliss for the eternal. For from bliss alone it appeareth are these creatures born, and being born they live by bliss, and to bliss they go hence and return. This is the lore of Bhrigu, the lore of Varuna, which has its firm base in the highest heaven. Who knoweth, getteth his firm base, he becometh the master of food and its eater. I will see the link point now to all that we had seen before, which we read rapidly across so many verses. Your base being firmed in this highest knowledge, bliss, what happens? You become master of annam, of matter. This is the interesting point. Having known bliss, it's not that you go away from matter, that you withdraw from the world. Remember, the entire journey is taking place in Bhrigu, in his body. He is concentrating on the nature of the eternal. And through 5 steps, he has gone to the highest reality of the eternal. Knowing him as bliss, he knows that from this bliss one attains to mastery of the whole material domain. And of course, all the domains in between are implied. The Upanishad is always succinct and suggestive. It does not need to elaborate all the steps. If you are master of matter, from the highest bliss, you have mastery over everything. So you see, there is no sense of the ascetic in the teaching. It is not that from the bliss you will gain the knowledge and you will be liberated from matter. From the bliss you have mastery over the whole dominion. Not only annam and firm base. It's not a shaky, abstract, some abstraction of spirituality. It is a foundation which is the most firm above, because the Upanishad describes the whole universe as born with its roots above in the eternal and the branches below. In the branches you see all the changes, but the roots are in the unchanging eternal. That is the most firm base. So from that base, the mastery you have here is also the most complete, solid and firm mastery. So he who knoweth, getteth his firm base, he becometh the master of food and its eater. Now not only you are master of matter, you are now the eater of matter. Meaning you enjoy the full manifestation. You enjoy the experience that this whole manifestation provides, including the experience in the material world and its multiplicity and division and dualities and so on. But from the foundation in eternity, you can enjoy this truly. So you are master of the food and its eater, great in progeny. Now remember, earlier there was this discussion about the progeny and how things are formed out of this double movement of the creative process. And now you are master of that creative process, meaning you become a co-creator. You participate in the very same process by which the divine manifests and creates. And then there is a word. You are also great in cattle. The word used is pashu, meaning the multiplicity here of the forms which are inferior to the mind's awareness, but the full multiplicity of all creatures and forms. Great in the splendor of holiness, great in glory. So the words, again, the Sanskrit words have deeper suggestion for which English words are inadequate. Just looking at this word glory, the Sanskrit word is Mahan Kirtiya. Kirti is in the root sense, it has the sense of being victorious and the glory that comes from victory. So it is this divine conquest of the material world, so to say, the divine conquest of the whole manifestation as the glory by which one lives. The very next verse goes with this. Thou shalt not blame annam. See, if you had any doubt that matter is somehow inferior, it starts by giving it as a commandment. That matter, having seen that matter was Brahman, matter is divine, in the very first realization, you will not blame matter. You cannot say that this is inferior or this is false or this is erroneous or the problem is of matter. Yes, matter is in an evolutionary process. But matter being essentially divine, it too shall reveal divinity. And rather than blaming matter, you have to work with it. And the next line, for that is thy commandment unto labor. That is the work you have to do to divinize this whole material world. And then it says, verily, prana also is matter and the body is the eater. The body is established upon prana and prana established upon body. Therefore, food here is established upon food. He who knows this food that is established upon food gets his firm base, becomes master of matter and its eater, great in progeny, great in cattle, great in radiance of holiness, great in glory. I see what it has done, having gone all the way to the bliss, and from the bliss described the mastery of matter, it dwells upon the domain of matter. And how that must be realized here. And the next verse, you shall not reject food, that is the vow of your labor, the waters are food, and so on. We skip that. And then the next verse, thou shalt increase and amass matter and food. That too is thy commandment. Verily, earth is food and the ether is the eater. What you are doing now through a series of verses, and we are just looking at the summary, it's engaging the material domain with each of the levels above and integrating them. First was matter, mastering matter, then the prana, mastering matter, and then the next, the mind and the ether, similarly mastering matter. And there's a whole integration taking place all the way up. And each time he becomes master of matter and the enjoyer, the eater of matter, and so on. And the last verse, which is very long, concludes with this experience that I am matter, and it I missed the word. It rejoices in the fact of being in matter and yet being immortal. So this final unification of the immortality of Satchidananda taking place with matter is the suggestion through the Taittiriya text. Now, significantly, what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to is that one verse which says that it is from bliss that everything emerges, everything is sustained by bliss, and into bliss everything returns. And one who has that knowledge is obviously liberated. And that is the one particular verse that Sri Aurobindo has pointed to, which is the 6th of the 3rd Valli. Now, having explored this, we come back to Sri Aurobindo's commentary and see what he says about the Taittiriya. Tadvanam, that delight, means therefore the transcendent delight, the all blissful Ananda, of which the Taittiriya Upanishad speaks as the highest Brahman from which all existences are born, by which all existences live and increase, and into which all existences arrive in their passing out of death and birth. It is as this transcendent delight that the Brahman must be worshipped and sought. Now we observe how these three relationships exist between the entire cosmos and the delight, the Anandam, the Satchidananda, that is Brahman. First, that is the origin. Our home was in that. Everything that exists has emerged from that, and if it has emerged from that, is made of that. The very essential substance that makes this whole universe is made of the substance of bliss. In another passage from Savitri, where this movement of the manifestation is described, Narada is speaking to the queen mother who has asked, why is this world a domain of suffering? And he says, once in the immortal boundlessness of self, in a vast of truth and consciousness and light, the soul looked out from its felicity. It felt the spirit's interminable bliss. It knew itself deathless, timeless, spaceless, one. It saw the eternal, lived in the infinite. And from there it looks out and sees a shadow of the possibility of otherness of self, and it, so to say, plunges into this experience of multiplicity and division, where there is the whole play of chaos, hazard, danger, pathos, grief and love and ruin and crash and pity and passion, and the play on the extinction's edge and the joy of creation out of nothingness, and so on. And all that calls the soul from its too safe eternity. And the result is this vast creation, and he concludes in that passage, a vast disguise conceals the eternal's bliss. So throughout, the theme is still the bliss of the eternal, which has become all this, concealing the bliss by its disguise. There is another passage from Sri Aurobindo's Thoughts and Glimpses, where he speaks of what the whole evolutionary process. First he describes the beginning, then the middle, and then the conclusion, the end. But in this, there are two portions. First, he speaks of delight. We speak of the Supreme as if he were a mathematician working out a cosmic sum in numbers, or a thinker resolving by experiment a problem in relation of principles and balance of forces. This is how the scientist sees the divine. But also we should speak of him as if he were a lover, a musician of universal and particular harmonies, a child, a poet. The side of thought is not enough. The side of delight too must be entirely grasped. Ideas, forces, existences, principles are hollow molds unless they are filled with the breath of God's delight. You see, at the heart of everything is this delight, and everything is a mold for the delight, even the highest thought, forces and ideas. The most essential principles would be meaningless unless they were filled with the delight. And so he gives us this picture of the universe, of the delight hidden inside everything. Now, if it is hidden inside, what is its purpose? Obviously, to flow out from within. So each of these ideas, forces, existences, principles are meant to become molds and vehicles through which progressively that delight will gradually creep out. So another verse, I'm skipping a few, another of these statements. If idea embracing force begot the worlds, delight of being begot the idea. So if idea embracing force gives birth to the world, what gives birth to the idea? Delight of being. Because the infinite conceived an innumerable delight in itself, therefore worlds and universes came into existence. Consciousness of being and delight of being are the first parents. You see, we have many parents. including our biological parents. But the first parents are consciousness of being and delight of being. Also, they are the last transcendences. When you ascend the cosmos and go back to the source, they are the last transcendences. Therefore, delight is the highest form of Brahman. And he explains the unconsciousness and pain and all that, where they are in this whole picture. Maybe I'll just read this to complete this statement. Unconsciousness is only an intermediate swoon of the consciousness, or its obscure sleep. Pain and self-extinction are only delight of being running away from itself in order to find itself elsewhere or otherwise. So these are things which are deep aphorisms to dwell upon. What is pain and what is self-extinction? Nothing but delight of being running away from itself for this purpose. And then he says, delight of being is not limited in time. It is without end or beginning. God comes out from one form of things only to enter into another. What is God after all? An eternal child playing an eternal game in an eternal garden. So the rest of the next section is man, the Purusha. It describes how the whole purpose of this play is the enjoyment. But the true enjoyer is the enjoyer within, and how the play takes place between man and nature, and where is the play of the enjoyment. But the next, which describes the end, the section describing the end, he explains how the meeting of man and God must always be an interpenetration of the human and the divine. And then he comes to the core of it. I'm skipping many lines. For those who are keen, this would be a worthwhile study and meditation on each of these verses. But we come to the acme of the knowledge and the purpose of this cosmos. He says, delight is the secret. Learn of pure delight, and thou shalt learn of God. How can you know of God? You can know of God as teacher, as punisher, as authoritarian, as friend, as parent, as many different relations, and many religions build on these different kinds of relationships. But all of those would give you only a glimpse of an aspect of God. If you want to know truly the deepest nature of the divine, then light is the secret. Learn of pure delight, and thou shalt learn of God. And this suggestion, pure delight, you see, delight finally reflects through all the levels of the cosmos, all the way down into our human experience. Although concealed, it is still present. But it is not pure, or it is mixed. Even our human sensory experiences are delight finally, but mixed, clouded, distorted even, reflected at least, delight. But if you can extract the pure essence of delight from the sense experience, learn of pure delight, and thou shalt learn of God. Take an example here. You sit before the ocean. Sit on a high hilltop and look down at the valley. Gaze at the stars. Sit in a beautiful garden. Look at the beauty of the flowers. And as you enjoy that experience, gently peel off the layers of the experience, both external and internal. As you watch the waves, there's a rhythm of the waves. Each wave is different, each is unique, and yet there's a repetition of the whole. And in that play of the waves, there is the play of the energy, which is enjoying. In that, there is the idea, which is fulfilling itself. In that is the creative knowledge, and in that is the pure delight. The pure delight which poured out, gave rise to that creative idea, formed the thought and drove the energy and created the form. Enjoying through all these layers. And you as if peel back the layers to glimpse that pure delight within. Whatever it is you're dwelling upon. And as you enjoy this experience, subjectively also you peel back the layers. Who is enjoying? My senses, my eyes, my physical sensation of it. Such beautiful colors, such wonderful smells and touches. And what is enjoying behind that? The joy of my life energies. My mind, which looks at all this and perceives the beauty of it all. And behind that, something more still. And behind that, the pure delight of being. Simply to be is the delight, and to be and know and experience all is that delight moving through all these layers. Pure delight. Learn of pure delight and thou shalt learn of God. So in the external movement you will perceive the divine presence playing in things. In the internal movement you will become aware of the divine presence living, inhabiting and enjoying from within. And so this is the secret. Delight is the secret. Learn of pure delight and thou shalt learn of God. And Sri Aurobindo then explains how this delight works. What then was the commencement of the whole matter? Existence that multiplied itself for sheer delight of being and plunged into numberless trillions of forms so that it might find itself innumerably. This was the beginning. And what is the middle? Division that strives towards a multiple unity. Ignorance that labors towards a flood of varied light. Pain that travails towards the touch of an unimaginable ecstasy. For all these things are dark figures and perverse vibrations. So you can see in the intermediate, it is the delight working through all these dark figures to recover itself. And what is the end of the whole matter? As if honey could taste itself and all its drops together. And all its drops could taste each other, and each the whole honeycomb as itself. So should the end be with God and the soul of man and the universe. And this is the most profound of the revelation of where this whole evolutionary journey is leading us to. We are, after all, that honey of the Satchidananda, but a single drop. If honey could taste itself, you discover your own deepest divine being, and that's the divine meeting himself, tasting himself. But not just internally, but all it could taste itself and all its drops together. And in each relation, in each contact with each object and form, it is the tasting of the honey, tasting honey. And then, and all its drops could taste each other. Now, if this is the experience of one being enjoying the Satchidananda delight in all relations, each person thus now sharing in that delight. And the third step, and each drop tasting the whole honeycomb as itself. You experience the whole universe as yourself in the totality of the Satchidananda revealing itself progressively. And so should the end be with God and the soul of man and the universe. So you find God within, you experience the soul of man in all these forms and the whole universe itself as the Satchidananda. And the promise is this whole movement towards a greater harmony. Love is the keynote, joy is the music, power is the strain, knowledge is the performer, the infinite all is the composer and the audience. And we can dwell on each of these and the profound symbolism that is held in this image. And he says then, we know only the preliminary discords which are as fierce as the harmony shall be great. But we shall arrive surely at the fugue of the divine beatitudes. And so this is the meditation on the divine as delight. It is as this transcendent delight that the Brahman must be worshipped and sought. What is your deepest relation with the divine as delight? Obviously one of self-giving and love. We come back to Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena. It is this beatitude, therefore, which is meant by the immortality of the Upanishads. And what will be the result of knowing and possessing Brahman as the Supreme Ananda? It is that towards the knower and the possessor of the Brahman is directed the desire of all creatures. Such was our experience in the contact we had with the physical form of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. In the very approach, one experienced that fulfillment. To whatever extent the container could hold and be filled, they poured. And the delight grew. In those who were more ready, what they poured led to the flowering out of the readiness. You may recall Kapali Shastriya describing his approach to Sri Aurobindo. He was, as you know, the only person who had already attained to self-realization before coming to Sri Aurobindo, had been through intense tapas and had studied the Veda along similar lines under Ganapati Muni. When he first came in touch with Sri Aurobindo's Arya, he was so inspired, he would read the entire Arya every day, every evening, and wait for the next edition to come, the next issue, and again read that every day. I'm surprised when people say things like, oh yes, I have read Sri Aurobindo's synthesis of yoga or Life Divine or whatever it is 10 years ago. It's such a pity that one has just read through it. But if you see Shastriya's example, he read again and again each chapter for the entire month until the next issue came and the next chapter. Obviously for a purpose. A man who had attained to so much, who found so much help in that reading, you can imagine what is the value of that reading. Well, when he first came to Sri Aurobindo, his experience was, among other things, when he saw Sri Aurobindo first walking through the guest house, the scene he describes in this luminous golden body. But when he came for the appointment given, as he was climbing up the stairs, all the centers, all the chakras of his being began to flower out and open. Just the approach to Sri Aurobindo's presence. And obviously the readiness in the being was such that this impact could be done. For most of us, the dullness of our consciousness is so great that at best we feel a little uplift, a little high, a little feel good, a little sense of wideness or lightness or joy, and that's about it. But the readiness according to which you came, he poured, even as you approached from a distance. And such we have many descriptions of this kind, of the time spent with Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. But you will see naturally, as he becomes center of the divine delight, all creation, all creatures, all beings tend towards that source. And Sri Aurobindo continues, in other words, he becomes the center of the divine delight, shedding it on all the world and attracting all to it as to a fountain of joy and love and self-fulfillment in the universe. When such a being is on earth, in the body, even if unknown in form and name, that shedding of the delight takes place on the world. You notice how it is something quite exceptional. In the last, from let's say 1880s through to 1950s or 40s, there was all over the world such a rich exploration, struggle, idealism, effort of all kinds, a hope, a promise even, of some great possibility, of some great leap, of some new step in human life and progress and so on. In every field, in every space in the world, there was this enthusiasm and seething of possibilities and churning and mixing and all over, widely, sometimes in the most diverse forms. It was not so before, it was not so after. In fact, in the late 40s already, there was a drop and a kind of a cynicism that has set in. And there has been no significant progress since 1950s, either in the sciences or in any other sphere of the arts or creativity. All the great things were done in that earlier phase, of which now we see only permutations and combinations and applications at best. There has rather been a general decline in human knowledge and human standards and values and thought. We are speaking, of course, of the general mass. You see how it coincides with the presence of one such. When the avatar comes upon the earth, there is this whole preparation for the coming because of the very pressure of his approach. And as he enters the physical form, there is this shedding of this energy and light and force and the delight on the whole world. And everything somehow wakes up, not knowing where it's coming from, but it knows it's there. And then when he withdraws, again things fall back. One person is all it takes. In one of his comments in his letters, Sri Aurobindo is asked about, well, how will more people know? Shouldn't there be a need for a wider dissemination and so on? Numbers, in other words. Sri Aurobindo's comment, very direct. He says, when did numbers ever matter? Number of people is not important, even one person. And it is in Savitri he writes, one man's perfection can save the world. That's all it takes. But one man who attains to this, in other words, he becomes the center of the divine delight, shedding it on all the world and attracting all to it as to a fountain of joy and love and self-fulfillment in the universe. And this attracting is not a question of knowing by name or form. It is the turn of the being towards that delight and to the closeness of the divine presence and the promise of the manifestation that you feel within. And so the verse in the Cana goes like this. The name of that is that delight. As that delight one should follow after it. He who so knows that, towards him verily all existences yearn. And you see how much is captured in this single verse. We have dwelt on it across 2 sessions. And having brought us to this, Sri Aurobindo now closes this part of the discussion by saying, this is the culmination of the teaching of the Upanishad. Now this is the culmination, because it has pointed us now to the highest experience. The last step it has shown, this is how you must pursue after. It's the culmination of the teaching of the Upanishad. There was a demand for the secret teaching that enters into the ultimate truth for the Upanishad. And in response, this doctrine has been given. So the text itself of the Kena now tells you this. In the next verse it says, "Thou hast said, speak to me, Upanishad. Spoken to thee is Upanishad. Of the eternal verily is the Upanishad we have spoken." Now, you could ask yourself, why should the Upanishad say this? Remember, the Upanishad does not waste a single word. If it repeats a word, there's a reason. If it does not speak a word, there's a reason. So, why is it bothering to say all this? You asked me to speak of Upanishad, now I have spoken, and of the eternal is this Upanishad spoken. What's the point of saying all this? And we have to go deeper into the verse, what it's actually saying. And that's what Sri Aurobindo is hinting at when he elaborates on this. There was a demand for the secret teaching that enters into the ultimate truths for the quote-unquote Upanishad. Now the word Upanishad itself, Sri Aurobindo is defining like this, as the secret teaching that enters into the ultimate truths. This is the definition of the word Upanishad. The secret teaching. It is not a teaching which is given obviously. That means everything you have read, if you have understood the words in its obvious sense, you have not got the teaching. The teaching is what is behind the words. That's the secret teaching. And the secret teaching is given, which teaches, which enters into the ultimate truth, not one of the superficial or intermediate truths. And so each of the verses, if you find a layer of meaning which is deeper, well, go deeper. Keep on going layer by layer in each verse until you reach the ultimate, beyond which there is no more. That is the ultimate truth to which it points. So the structure of the Upanishad is such. There are words which build a certain sequence, but in each of the verses there is a depth and multiple layers. As you complete the first journey, you've been brought to a certain level of perception which now allows you to see deeper behind each of the verses, and you reread them for their next level of meaning. And now you come to a deeper experience, knowledge, consciousness, which allows you to go still deeper and so on. That is why you are asked to dwell upon the Upanishad. Now, the definition of the word Upanishad, as you will see in textbooks, on Wikipedia, in dictionaries, Upa, close, Nishad, seating. Sit close. So, as they will normally say, you sit close to the teacher and the teacher reveals to you, and that's Upanishad. It was a teaching, in the forest you sat close, there were noises, there was wind, there were sounds of the animals, so you sit close to the teacher. And obviously that is the most superficial and silly meaning. Sri Aurobindo has already told you what the full meaning, deeper meaning is, the secret teaching that enters into the ultimate truth. But now let's go to the etymology. Upa, Nishad. Even if you take it as sitting close to what? It is the approach, not so much sitting, approaching and dwelling. What do you approach and dwell in? To the self. And so the whole Upanishad is the dwelling and approach in dwelling to the self, which is the teacher. We are the disciple and the self is the teacher. And it is the self in whose closeness we sit. And in sitting, of course, it's not a static condition. You sit where you are, but then you grow in approach, which is a state of being seated. But grow in approach to the self. And now you reread the verse and you see what it says to you. Thou hast said, speak to me, Upanishad. Who said this? We said. So the self or the teacher is telling you, you said, speak to me of the Upanishad. And Sri Aurobindo put a footnote here. Upanishad means inner knowledge, that which enters into the final truth and settles in it. So there's this double movement of the approach and the being seated in that deeper truth. So when he says, you said to me, speak to me Upanishad. You said, that is the disciple first asked. And then the disciple said, speak to me, to the self. And then it says, spoken to thee is Upanishad. See, there are three stages of the journey. If you did not first call, if you did not first strive for the knowledge, even if this knowledge was given to you, where is the vehicle to receive? Your first call sets the foundation which allows you to receive. But then, the nature of your call defines what you will get. So it's not enough, I'm aspiring. For what? I'm aspiring to have a comfortable life, to solve my immediate problem. Well, that's all you will get. Thou hast said, first step, speak to me Upanishad. That is, reveal to me this inner knowledge into which I can enter and settle in. And since you asked for that, spoken is Upanishad. Now, speech, remember, has a very different sense in the text. It started with, in the first verse, what is that which is the speech of our speech? Remember? By whom impelled is this word that men speak? Now, having come to the conclusion of the text, if it uses the word speech, obviously it's not speaking of the words spoken by the Rishi. It is speaking of that speech of the speech to which you were led earlier. So it is Brahman articulating himself to you, revealing himself to you. It is the full imprint of his self-revelation as an experience that is given to you. That's the sense in which we understand when it says, spoken to thee is Upanishad. You see how profound the whole meaning is. And when you see it in the context, in the sequence, it's obvious that this is what they're saying. Thou hast said, speak to me Upanishad. Spoken to thee is Upanishad. Of the eternal verily is the Upanishad that we have spoken. The knowledge revealed is that, the experience given is of the eternal. And then the next verse, two more verses remaining, which also Sri Aurobindo comments on, but we simply read it for now and dwell upon it next time. Of this knowledge, austerity and self-conquest and works are the foundation. The Vedas are all its limbs. Truth is its dwelling place. So in revealing the Upanishad, it is telling you what you need to build for yourself as the basic vehicle that will allow you to receive the full imprint of experience. What is your requirement? Austerity, self-conquest and works are the foundation. Vedas are the limbs. Truth is its dwelling place. And the last verse of the text, he who knows this knowledge smites away evil from him, and in that vaster world and infinite heaven finds his foundation. Yea, he finds his foundation. It is a celebration of this attainment. So of this, Sri Aurobindo's commentary, Sri Aurobindo's commentary, this is the culmination of the teaching of the Upanishad. There was a demand for the secret teaching that enters into the ultimate truth for the Upanishad. And in response, this doctrine has been given. It has been uttered. The Upanishad of the Brahman, the hidden ultimate truth of the supreme existence. Its beginning was the search for the Lord, master of mind, life, speech, and senses, in whom is the absolute of mind, the absolute of life, the absolute of speech and senses. And its close is the finding of Him as the transcendent beatitude and the elevation of the soul that finds and possesses it into a living center of that delight, towards which all creatures in the universe shall turn as to a fountain of its ecstasies. So this we will dwell upon, the conditions, the requirement for us to be able to attain to that, to be able to receive this knowledge experience. And after that there will be one more chapter still where Sri Aurobindo will give us a broad picture of what is this leading to and setting a large context to this. So it's a theme worth meditating upon, and we hold once again that one idea, the name of that is that delight. As that delight one should follow after it.